Okay, hello, and welcome to the fourth Wild Art session. Firstly though, so last week was Dragon's Eyes, and I'd just like to show you now some of the dragon's eyes that were painted in the Gallery of Dragons. So here we go. So some amazing bits of artwork there, and thank you so much to all of those who are giving these a go, and I love seeing your work, so please keep sending me the examples of what you've been doing, and keep painting, keep drawing, keep being creative, because it's a great diversion through these times. Okay, so for today's session we're going to be having a go at Hogwarts on a moonlit night, and we're going to do a series of landscapes, kind of fantasy landscapes, the next few weeks. You will need, for today, that same bit of card. Really helps to work on card rather than paper with paint. Palette-wise, we've got two again. So the first one has black and blue. The second one has blue, some white, and a little bit of brown, and a little bit of yellow. We've got something circular to draw around, so roll of tape works pretty well. Pencil, for doing a few bits of pencil work. Water pot with primarily that medium-sized brush. If you have one as well, a smaller brush would help for some of the details, but don't worry too much. You could always use a pencil crayon or something else for some of the smaller details. Another bit of card, which we'll be using for a stencil. And then a couple of bits of sponge for doing some of our backgrounds. Okay, let's give this a go. Okay, right. So we've got our first palette with the black and the blue, and we're going to mix them together. So let's take a bit of the black and then quite a lot of the blue. I think we probably want a bit more blue than we do black. Okay, that's on our sponge, and let's just start getting that across our bit of card. Okay, it's maybe a little bit too blue at this stage, so let's just bring in a bit of that black to darken it up a bit. Okay, all the way to the edges again. You guys might want to put something down before you do this. Okay, a bit more blue, a bit more black, come right down. All the way to your edges. Okay. Okay, up to the top left corner, I'd like you to make it just a bit more blue. A bit less of the black mixed in. So top left corner, let's make that a little bit more blue rather than black. Okay, it's looking okay. I think I'm going to just slightly wet my sponge because I think it's a bit too dry, and I'm going to mix in a bit more black to this right hand side. Don't worry about it being a smooth blend, because we're going to be doing lots of different things on top of this, lots of details. Okay, I reckon that's about right. Okay, we'll leave that to dry, and that's going to take a few minutes, but we're going to do something else in the meantime. Okay, while we're waiting for our bit of card to dry, we're going to work on the other bit of card that you guys have, which can be any colour, it doesn't matter. First of all, upon the second bit of card, I want you to mark out along it roughly half the height of your bit of now coloured card. So that's roughly halfway, that's about half the height. Okay, so onto that now, I want you to draw from the bottom to the top an outline for Hogwarts. Now, for my own part, I think I am going to use an image online, so I'm going to look up Hogwarts and use that for my outline. But if you want to make something up, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer as to what Hogwarts should look like, because originally they were books, and the whole idea was that you'd use your imagination. Having said that, I'm going to have a bit of a look at an example of Hogwarts. So, come in from the edge of your card. You want to maybe sort of start part way along. For mine, I'm going to do sort of a rockiness coming up initially. So that's all part of this same distance as well. And then we've got the castle sort of starting there, and it's got some turrets. I'm just going to do this very roughly to begin with, and then I can always refine it. So that's one of the main turrets coming up there. And then it comes down and along. And this can be a reasonable width. I think, you know, the height we want to be kept at that, and the width can be the same or maybe a little bit more than the height. Okay, down. So like I say, you guys can do something much like this, or just kind of go crazy and do something very much out of your wildest dreams. And to be honest, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see you doing something unique and different and creative. Okay, so once I've got to there, I think I'm then back to rocks, so I sort of come back down with some rocks like that. Okay, something like that. Okay, once you've confirmed your lines, so I've just gone over mine again, and I've made myself a little bit more sort of happy with the exact lines that I've done, so slightly darker pencil. You're going to want to now cut along that line as neatly as you possibly can, including all your little details, going over them. And what we need is both part A, which is the castle itself, and part B, which is the paper around the castle. We need both of those to be really precisely intact. So no cutting off little edges and extra little bits. Try and make your cut absolutely continuous and accurate along the lines that you've got. If you wait just a moment, I'll cut these out and show you basically what I mean. So just give it a moment and see the way in which I have cut these out, because we're going to need to use them really precisely as stencils. Okay, so I've cut that out now as precisely as I could, which means I've got a perfectly intact part A and a perfectly intact part B as well. So no bits cut off, just doing my best, and you might need to get someone else to give you a hand with this. What we're going to be using these for, so part B will be for the silhouette of the castle itself, and we're going to be sponging black paint into this to create the castle. And then we're going to use part A and flip it over to create the reflection, and we'll actually then be sponging lighter paint around it to create the sort of moonlit glistening on the lake surface. So that's why we need part B and part A. Okay, right, we're going to go back to our main bit of card. Okay, hopefully your main bit of card is now fully dry. You might need to sort of slightly bend it back into a usable shape, because the paint will have made it curl just a little bit. Okay, we're now going to do a couple of things with pencil. First of all, we need to draw a line across not quite the middle of our card, but maybe, so let's say that's the middle. Just come down from it by a bit, so maybe almost sort of a third of the way up or thereabouts. And we want to come right across. So this is going to be our skyline, the line between the lake and the castle itself. Okay, and then up into the sky section, bring your circular thing, and if you want to have that coming slightly off the edge of the card, that would be fine. So maybe slightly up from the horizon line. I'm just giving that a centimetre or so. And I'm going to draw around the outside of it. If you want to do a slightly smaller moon, you could always draw around the inside of whatever you have. That's kind of up to you. Okay. Right. There we go. There's our two pencil lines. That's all we need for pencil. Okay, we're going to work on the detail of the moon now, because that is one of our main features. So I'm going to take my blue with my medium-sized brush, mix in some water because we want it to move nice and smoothly, and then take some of your white and bring that in there as well, but just a bit. We basically at this stage just want a light blue, and then as precisely as you can, we're going to do the whole of the moon. So as usual, probably start with just taking the paint along that line of the edge of your moon first. So I've got the card as part of my edge, all the way along. And once you've done that precise outline, it means you can just relax so much more about the application of the paint inside of that. Okay. So this is light blue going on top of the darker blue that we've already got for our background night sky. And once we've done this, we'll probably give it a couple of minutes to dry so that we can get our next layer on. That's the thing with paint, you're often waiting for it to dry so you can get your layers on. But with acrylic or poster paint, that's what I'm using, acrylic. Poster paint's fine. It's, you know, slightly lower quality, but it works pretty well for most things. Maybe just not so well for highlights. Okay, let's give that a couple of minutes to dry. Okay, cool. Right, that's decently dry now. So I'm going to take some of the blue, and then we need quite a bit of the white. So we want a lighter blue than we had just now for the moon. So mix in enough white that you're fairly confident that it's lighter than what you've already put on there, and mix in that water so it's going to move nice and smoothly. Okay, right, into the moon. We want to now start drawing some shapes. So I would start with a few bigger, either circles or sort of oval shapes. So let's do one and then another one connected there. Let's go up here with a slightly bigger one and one out there. So fairly connected. Let's come out this side as well. So not going at the moment right to the edge of the moon. Let's stick sort of within the interior of the moon with our shapes. Mixing in a few smaller ones, and I'm going to do, as you get to the edges, because you're looking more along sort of the kind of the length of the moon, if that makes sense, your ovals or your outlines will get thinner. Okay, so if it was right in the middle, it would be, let's say, a perfect circle, whereas more to the edge, it will be more like a disc, because it's slightly foreshortened as you're looking along it. Okay, I'm going to do a few smaller ones, I think, in the middle here, along a sort of strip up the middle. So just going to do that, and we're going to be highlighting those in a different way in a sec, because we're going to make one side of the moon brighter and the other a bit less bright. So you've got to remember, the moon itself it's not producing its own light. It's the sun that produces the light, and the moon reflects it. So that's how you can have one side of it brighter than the other. Okay, I think we're pretty much at the point where there's enough circles now. I'll just do maybe one more there. Yeah, let's call it a day with the circles. So, I need to take that same light blue, and we're going to go and fill in all of the areas. Let's mix that properly, so we've got a bit of stray white on the brush. Okay, fill in all the areas between your circles, all the way around, and of course really especially carefully at the edge of the moon, because you want to keep as much as possible that nice crisp edge to your moon. So when you're going along the edge, you see I'm not being as careful as I should be, so maybe I should do that first again. Maybe I'm going to go all the way around the edge again carefully, so I'm just really focused on that for now. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Right, okay, now I can sort of slightly more loosely and in a relaxed way fill in my gaps between the circles. Yeah, I'm going to do this a little bit more rapidly, but of course with you guys, take as much time as you want, relax into it. As ever, get your tunes on. Actually, slightly coincidentally at the moment in the background I've got a bit of Harry Potter with this track's called Neville's Waltz, and it's from the 4th film with the Triwizard Tournament when they have the evening ball, and I think that's my favourite film. Okay, right, with the same blue I'm just going to do a few little details into some of the bigger bits, but just sort of right into the middle of them, not going to the edge, because you want to get that full, these are craters of course in the moon surface, you want to still have that crater shape, but maybe a little bit of light is getting into the middle bits. Okay, so we're stepping it up again with the brightness and the whiteness. So this is almost now more white with a little bit of blue mixed in with it rather than the other way around. So it's another notch up in terms of the lightness. Now we're going to make basically the right hand side of the moon brighter than the left hand side. What we want to do first though is take this even brighter colour, just go along all of the edge of the moon again. Now it's better with this if you come slightly inside your edge rather than going over it. And I know this bit's tricky. What you can do if you want is you could even be using pencil crayon for this part if you feel you could be a bit more accurate. That's one option. If you drew on the inside of a shape, you could even still put that shape around to be getting these more precise lines. You've got options, and as with anything when it comes to art, experimentation is always a good thing, so just try things out. Okay, I'm going to leave that left hand side now, but with the right hand side I want to come around my shapes again, all the way down to perhaps there. And I'm going to draw just a few more shapes into the lighter blue. Okay, keep going around the ones that you've already done. Head up and keep imagining that sort of middle line going up your moon, straight up there, and don't go beyond that, because we're very much wanting to make this like the right hand side of the moon is the part that's really glowing, whereas the left hand side is slightly more in shadow. So the sun is somehow catching this right hand side of the moon. And like I talked about with, I think, the dragon, a lot of what I'm thinking about while I'm painting is where is the light source, and that really guides me. Obviously it guides me as to where I put the light, but also the shadows and the direction of everything. And once you've thought about where that light source is, that's how you can really then start to make something 3D. Okay, so I've gone around all the different craters, and you can see into the rest of the space I'm making a few more crater type shapes, but again a lot more long and thin, because at this far extreme it's going to be really foreshortened. Okay, right, that's that. Let's give that another quick moment. Okay, we're now going to use essentially pure white, but I want you to water it down a bit, again, just so that we're keeping that fluidity to the movement of the paint. Okay, with this, we're going to do one last occasion. I know it seems a bit strange perhaps that we're going over and over this, but actually with painting it's all about the layering up, building up of colour and tone. So come just to that sort of halfway mark underneath, maybe slightly beyond, because maybe at the edge a little bit more light's creeping around the edge of the moon. And trace that line right round again to meet there. I'm going to try and make mine just a little bit brighter. Okay, and then afterwards wipe off the excess because we don't want to bring too much in. You can bring just a little bit of that into just some of the outer edge parts of the moon. You're just sort of creeping in with a few bits of detail from that far right edge, because just a little bit of light is coming and hitting a few of these bits of crater, like maybe that edge is higher up, maybe that edge is a little bit higher, maybe there, and certainly more as you head towards the far right hand side of the moon. More and more light is hitting there. So the light is hitting obviously the things furthest to the right, but also the things that are higher up as well. That's why, let's say if you're doing a mountain scene, you'd have the tops of the mountains really catching the light, and they catch the light to the latest part of the day because they're highest up. Okay, right, I've just taken a bit more white. I'm just going to do just the tiny bit more highlighting on this far right hand side of the moon, just to bring that out just a touch more. Right, I think that's it for the moon. If you guys want to do more to that, I'd say feel absolutely free, but just make sure you're keeping a certain amount of contrast. And something I've learned recently, well, in the last few years, is don't highlight everything. So I used to just go over and do highlights everywhere, but actually being a little bit more restrained with your highlights often leads to, I think, a more interesting overall result, a more dramatic result overall. Okay, that's it for the moon. Okay, we're bringing in our stencil, and this is where we've got to take our time and have a think as to where we're going to put it exactly. So if you want to, you could have it going a tiny bit over the moon. I think I'm going to keep mine to the right of the moon and keep the moon just pristine as it is. So I'm going to bring it just a little bit over like that, and you want it to line up there and there with the line that you've drawn across for your sort of the lake. Okay. And underneath, let's bring this into place. You need to hold everything in place. If that's going to be really tricky, what you could do is blue tack things into place, and then you're sort of slightly more hands-free. Okay, so we're going to go back to our sponge, and we're going to be using pure black. And I've mixed in a bit of water, and we're going to just sponge that on. So don't mix in too much water, because then it will sort of bleed under the edges of what you've done. Go along as precisely as you can. Oops. Okay. If you want to, you could just have a quick check after you've done a bit to make sure that it's not going over the edges too much. But with this, you don't want to be pushing the sponge up under it. You want to make sure you're just going over the card. So when I'm sponging, sort of half the sponge is on the card and the other half is on the image underneath. So yeah, half is on the card on top, to make sure that I'm getting as crisp an edge as possible. I mean, it's a little bit tricky with a sort of fairly rough tool like this, washing up sponges. Okay, all the way down there. Okay, that's going quite well. And then I just need to make sure I'm holding that again to get this last edge. Okay. Using stencils is something that I do a lot with my mural work, especially if I'm going to be using a particular image several times, because it saves so much time. It also means that you get a fairly nice crisp edge, and you can get a nice uniform layer of the paint into that area. Okay, bit of a moment of truth here. Oh, you know what I can see is that I haven't quite managed to come all the way down there, so I'm just gonna do that. So I haven't quite got my line as crisp as it should be down at the bottom here, so let's just do that. Okay, second moment of truth. Let's take a look. Okay, that's pretty good for now. That will do for now, because we're going to be doing a bit of outlining and highlighting of the top bits of the castle. So, yeah, let's give that a few moments to dry. Okay, so that's pretty much dry now. So we're now going to do a little bit of a layering of more light hitting the lake, just a base layer for that, before we start to move on with the brush to a bit more detail in the castle, the light shining on it and a few lights shining out from it, some stars in the sky, a few other little bits. So let's take the other bit that we cut out for our stencil, and we need it to be obviously the mirror image. So if you just check first that it matches up with what you've done there, and then fold it over and along that line at the base. And what we want to do, we're going to use the sponge again, but with our sort of mid blue, the blue that we originally had for the background, but that we mixed in with the black. But this is now the pure blue with no black mixed in. So we want it to be brighter. So again, just go over the stencil, and we'll go right up towards that line. If you can do that fairly precisely anyhow, great. If you need to use something else to lay along that line, just to make sure that you don't go over it, then by all means do that. So I'm just going to try and quite carefully go along my horizon line, but don't worry about getting too close to it, because we will add a few bits of highlight across there with the brush at the end. So don't worry about going right up to that line, but we'll go over all of the rest with that middle blue and bits of detail there. You can see it's a bit of an effort to hold it precisely in place. I mean, aspects of this are quite awkward, but hopefully the overall effect will be worth it. And if you get a little bit mucky, then, well, that's kind of what painting's all about. Okay, let's take a look. And again, we're going to need to give this a moment to dry, so it's a good chance to head out for a bit of fresh air, or yeah, put the kettle on, or whatever you fancy doing, really. Pick the next bit of music. Right, so that's it now for the use of the stencils. We're done with those. And of course, now that you've got these, you can use them for a second attempt or a third attempt if you want, where you can be doing things slightly differently each time. That's the great thing with stencils, is once you've got them, you can use them any number of times. Okay, let's give that another few minutes to dry. Okay, this is ready to go back in with the brush now and get some more detail in. So, I'm going to still use the medium-sized brush for now. If any of you have a smaller brush and you want to switch to it for being a bit more precise here, you could do that. Okay, what I've done, I've mixed a bit of our middle blue with just a little bit of that brown, just to slightly dull the blue, because we don't want it to be quite so bright. And I often do this when I'm doing things like rocks and buildings. I use a bit of blue mixed with a bit of brown, and it makes for a really useful, interesting colour. And you can go a little bit further into the brown end with it, or the blue end, but it's just quite a nice sort of natural colour. Okay, so we've got that little bit of water mixed in as ever. What we want to be thinking about now is what parts of the rockiness and our castle are catching the light. And we're going to use this colour to do a reasonable portion of highlighting before at the end doing the brightest highlights, which are really, really catching the moonlight. So this is sort of a middle tone. So I think for this, there's a bit of light along this edge of the rocks, kind of coming up to maybe there. And possibly a few more bits. I'm just going to join in a few bits kind of coming up further as well. So yeah, it's almost like you're doing lines coming up diagonally left to right, but making them a little bit more interesting. If you just try and imagine the lines of rocks coming up, if you've done that as part of your base. Okay, and a few thinner lines mixed in there as well. Okay, I reckon that's probably enough for that, because I think the light's not hitting anything further along. Okay, as for the castle itself, what aspects have you got? So you've got to think, have you got rooftops? Have you got spires? So I can say for sure that some light will be hitting this edge, and probably for me along a certain line there where I've got the beginnings of the castle. It's sort of a ledge that the castle is on, so the light's going to be hitting that, for example. Okay, the light will hit there. It's going to hit the side of that spire, the side of that spire, and then certainly, so all the left-hand sides of spires, the light's going to be hitting them. I'm going to do a bit more for that one, a bit more light hitting that. Okay, I think for me, I've also got this straight bit of roof here where the light is hitting, so I'm just going to do a portion of that coming up and along to around there. Okay, and there, and down a bit to there. I think that's about right for the light hitting all those areas. Right, so again, that spire, maybe a little bit along there. Keep referring back to your moon and thinking about where the light will be shining on your castle in relation to the moon. Which surfaces will it be hitting? If you want to, so kind of backtrack a bit here, if you want to, you can do this initially in pencil or even pencil crayon, and then if you want to afterwards, you could always add to it with paint if you want it to stand out a little bit more. But it would be no bad thing to have a go at this firstly with pencil crayon. Okay. Right, some light hitting there. I've got to think maybe there's a rooftop along there. So it's good to bring some horizontal lines along as well as the vertical ones to indicate that light is kind of catching along some lines of things that are sticking out more, as well as the vertical lines which are facing towards the moon. Okay, we're getting there with this. It doesn't take much. This is one of those situations where less is more. Like I said last time, sometimes more is more, but often less is more, and just little hints of things can be enough to give the right overall impression. So again, I've just brought a couple more horizontal lines across, because maybe there are rooftops along here that the light is catching and spreading along the rooftop. So I think there's a rooftop there that the light's catching and spreading along. Right, is the light catching anything along here? I don't think so. So I think that's it for this first layer of... Okay, so I've mixed up some really light blue. We're going to do 3 or 4 different things now with the light blue to add some details here and there. If you've got a smaller, more delicate brush, I'd say now's the time to use that. If not, I would suggest switching to pencil crayon and use either a light blue or a white pencil crayon to do these details. Because we want to be a little bit more precise with thin lines. Okay, first thing we're going to do with this, we're going to trace along the... There's a little bit too much water on there. The line of our castle. So everything from the edge, if you've done sort of a rocky base, do that, and even come up underneath lines, because the moonlight's catching kind of the back of everything. The moon is behind the castle, and so actually we're going to do basically a full outline of our castle with this lighter tone. We'll come up, so be as precise as you can, and that's why maybe if you need to, this is a good occasion to use the pencil crayon. And there's nothing wrong with mixed media. I think mixed media is pretty cool actually. Okay, so we're doing the backs as well, so not just the fronts of things. So come up that line. I'm going to do just a bit of that line of the roof as well, so I think that's catching the light. Also up there. Okay, come along the back edge, down and in, and be as accurate as you can be. and stick as close as you can to the original outline. But this is also, it's quite a nice opportunity to reaffirm your outline. Like, for example, if when you did your stencil, the outline ended up being a bit fuzzy, this gives you an opportunity to clarify again exactly what the outline of your castle is. And often I find that when I am painting, my initial layers are a little bit rough, and it's not clear enough exactly where the lines of things go, but then usually at the end I go over everything with a thin brush doing my highlights, and that gives a nice crisp edge to your outline of things, brings them into sharper relief. Okay, pretty much there with this. So I still will come down this far edge of the castle as well with the line, because I think the moonlight is still just catching that very edge of the whole thing, down to the line there. Okay, at the very end I might do a few tiny bits of extra highlight with white on the top of this, but let's just wait, everything at its right time. Okay, with that same kind of tone of blue, let's go all the way along our line of the lake. So even along that line of the base of your castle as well. But that's the only bit within the shadow area. But so we want to have that line there because it defines the castle meeting the lake. And also you probably would get a slight brightness along there of just the water washing up against the base of the castle, for example. Okay, cool. Right, the same light blue. Let's go from under the moon, and we're going to do horizontal lines coming down and along through the lake. You want to make sure, as I've not had just now, that you've got a reasonable amount of water mixed in with your paint for this, because you want it to move really smoothly. Once you've got the right motion with your arm, let me just check, yep. Once you've got the right motion with your arm, you can just keep going with that kind of line. Try and keep them as horizontal as you can, so as straight across as you can. And if you're using a pencil or like a wax crayon, for example. Okay. So yeah, once you've done a first layer of that, maybe let's just bring a few of those horizontal lines slightly across and into the shadow of our castle. Just getting a little bit of light coming across there, but not far into it. You want to keep the shape of that shadow pretty well. Okay. Yeah, so keep those lines as horizontal as you can, but if they're a little bit off horizontal, that really doesn't matter. You can always sort of compensate and sort of go up the other way. Okay, I'm going to lighten up our paint a little bit now. Just a little bit more white. And come in slightly brighter with some of these lines underneath the moon, for where the reflection is the brightest, really catching the surface of the lake. And it's going to be brighter still along that line, isn't it, the right hand side. So we'll try and achieve that more in a sec. Okay, while we're on this level of blue, I'll try a couple of things. This is a detail you don't need to add, but if you feel like having a go, oops, by all means do. Ready-made stars, okay. Right, so up here, I'm going to bring it into the centre a bit more. I'm going to have a go at doing a head wig. So let's start with just, with this blue, a circle. Okay. Out from that, underneath, we're going to do what would be the tail. So come out, basically a sort of triangle type shape. but not quite coming to such a pinch point in the circle. So this is going to be Hedwig flying towards us. Okay, out from one side. Let's head up. This is going to be one of the wings at an angle, and then maybe change the angle a little bit and come up like that. Okay, so at the end let's just do a few of the further out feathers of the wing, and then we can just come in like that for the rest of that wing. Okay, as best we can now, we're going to do the same up on this side. So just come up and then change your angle there. And you're trying as best you can, see how you go, none of it matters too much. You're trying as best you can to mirror what you've done over there. Okay, and we'll come under, along and back in to the body. Okay, let's just leave that to dry for now. We're going to do some little highlights in a moment, but let's just leave that to dry. So I'd suggest keeping that quite confined, quite small. And again, before you've done any of this, if you want to, do an outline first in pencil. Have a go on another bit of paper, you know, there's no harm in doing that. Okay, now that we've got Hedwig there, I'm just going to do the beginnings of a few of our stars. So I'm going to do a few little crosses for where the brightest stars are going to be. An accidental splatter down there, so there's a few stars ready made down there. Okay, another one here, maybe another one down there, and then one up here. Okay, let's leave that to dry for 2. Okay, right, I'm going to add a few last highlights, and then we're finishing at the very end with the lights on in the castle. So I'm going to use now pure white, tiny bit of water. Again, if you don't have a thin enough brush to be doing this with a brush, by all means use a pencil crayon or a Posca pen or something equivalent that you might have where you can be a bit more accurate with these highlights. And I'd like to see how you get on with those mediums as well. Okay, with our bright white, let's think where our brightest highlights are going to be. So this edge of the moon is the brightest, so let's just do a few of our highlight lines coming along what is the curve of that edge of the moon into the lake. Okay, that's probably about right. I might just do a few extra little bits. That'll do, that'll do. Okay, I'm going to do a few more little highlights on a few parts of the outline of Hogwarts, just to emphasize where the light's hitting most brightly. So maybe some of these diagonal lines, maybe it's hitting most brightly along some of those. And there. These bits across here. Okay, that's probably about right for that. Okay, as for our stars, wherever you've done your crosses, you want to do a really bright dot in the middle. And that shows that the star is really glowing and twinkling. But let's do a few that are slightly less bright, so just little dots. You can see with me, I'm not using the whole end of the brush, I'm twisting it and trying to just use the very corner of the brush. So slightly more like a pen, I guess. How you'd use a pen. And again, with brushes, the lighter you press, the more accurate you can be. So you only need to press very, very lightly, really. Okay, I think that will do for that. Right, now, over to Hedwig. Got to make sure I'm not smudging as I go through things. Right, where are the brightest highlights for Hedwig? So, tops of the wings, so just along that top edge there. And down. Same for this wing. So the underside of the wings isn't catching the light, it's just those top edges. You might want to go over those again just to really emphasize. Again, this is where you might want to use the pencil crayon to be a bit more accurate. Okay, this edge of the tail, but just that very edge, and then maybe one of the feet underneath. And then that edge of basically the head and body, but it's essentially just the head, isn't it, that's sticking out towards us. And then if you can manage it, a little triangle, you can see my brush isn't quite allowing me to do this. A little triangle coming down into that circle that you've made, and that's then the sort of the brow of the owl coming down towards its beak. Okay, you know what, I reckon that's enough. It's something in the distance, it's not close up, and we just don't need to add more details than that because we're just wanting to give the hint of it. So let's leave that. Okay, final touches now, and this is where you want to think about where your lights might be. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of the yellow and just a tiny touch of the brown. Okay, and I'm using the thinner brush, but again for you guys, if you want to use pencil crayons, they'll go on top of the paint that we've already laid down pretty well actually. Okay, so this is definitely a situation where less is more. We just need a few hints of some lights. So for me, this is sort of the Great Hall part of Hogwarts. So they have got a few big long windows along the side, so I'm just going to do a few lines fairly spaced out along just that side. That's enough for that. I think at this end they have the entranceway, so I'm just going to do a bigger area for what will be a doorway there. Okay, that's enough for that. Again, less is more. And then as we go up through this section, I think there are a few places where there are some more lights and windows. So we'll do one there, and then across here, I think there's a few going across this section, and maybe just one or two up there. Okay, that's enough for that. So down to this, maybe again a few lines to show some windows there, some longer windows. Here, let's do another door. So if you've done a different outline, just have a stop and a think as to where the windows might be, and therefore where the lights might be shining through. And just do a few, don't do too many. So I'm going to do another door here. More windows up there. And lastly, maybe there's a few more. Maybe this is another hall type thing, so there's a few more there. And where you put your windows is helping to show the shape of things as well. So it shows the shape of that side and where the doors are pointing out. Okay, let that dry, and while that's drying, we're going to mix in some white to that yellow, because we want to, in a few places, show that the light's even brighter. So into just a portion of each of these, maybe for these ones the tops, that's where the light's actually shining. And for the doorway, maybe again it's the top of the doorway, maybe there's a light up there. And then for these, just do a couple of them brighter, because maybe not all of them are brighter. Maybe some of them, the light's further back into that space. What I'm often doing while I'm drawing and painting is really trying to put my imagination into the scene and think, what does all of this look like? What's actually going on in there? And that helps me to think where certain things should go, like light sources. Right, I'm going to finish up with just a couple of these having the brightest light. So the entrance to the Great Hall, I think that's got a really bright light, maybe the one above it, and then maybe a couple of central ones there and there, where perhaps the chandeliers are coming down. Again, let your imagination sort of go into the scene and think about where the brightest lights are. Cool. We could do loads more, but let's leave it there. I've got a bit of Narnia playing in the background. Okay, so that's it. if you get to this stage, amazing. If you've managed to get Hedwig in there as well, that's fantastic. If any of you want to leave this one here and move on to another one where you can try extra things, that's also no bad idea. Your embellishments could be more planets in the sky. You could try some shooting stars up in the sky. You could, for example, try some silhouettes of things up there, like it could be a hippogriff, so buckbeak, it could be a dragon. Maybe in the Great Lake you've got some tentacles coming out of the kraken emerging out from the Great Lake, or the boats heading across with the first years. Maybe some of the witches and wizards riding across in front of the moon, so again silhouettes, and it might be that you want to do those with pencil, crayon or pen, or something else where you can be a bit more precise. So by all means, really go to town on the multimedia with this. You don't have to stick to paint. I personally love paint, but I know that it has its shortcomings. So yeah, I will send this piece of artwork to whoever can come up with the most imaginative Hogwarts scene based on this. So I'd like you to go through the tutorial, but then beyond that, I'd love to see what more you add to that scene to make it your own and really let your imagination run wild with this. And I'll send this painting to the one where I think you've been the most original. And I'm not looking for overall quality. That's important because I want all ages to try this. I'm looking for your use of your imagination and creativity to come up with something completely unique to you. Okay, right, I look forward to seeing all your amazing artwork, and I'll be producing another piece next week, and it will either be a scene of outer space with the Milky Way and Jupiter, possibly an alien spaceship, that could be our embellishment, or we're also going to be doing a scene of the northern lights with a forest in the foreground, a silhouette of forests, and up in the sky will be a city in the sky, and that's going to be linking in with His Dark Materials, if any of you know that story. If not, have a look into that because it's an amazing set of stories. Okay, all the best to everyone out there. Have a lovely week, and I'll see you again soon.